Welcome to episode 393 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Meyers, screenwriter and blogger at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing producer Gary W. Goldstein, who was the original producer on Pretty Woman and helped develop that writer and script. And he's gone on to do lots of other great films like Under Siege and The Mothman Prophecies. He's a great networker and in fact is networking with me by being on this podcast. We talk a lot about networking and specifically cold calling and how to build a network of industry contacts. He has years of experience in the industry and doing cold calling, so he's got some really great knowledge for all of us screenwriters just looking to build our network. So stay tuned for that interview. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking or sharing it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mentioned in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast, and then just look for episode number 393. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide, teach you how to write a professional logline inquiry letter, and how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I am interviewing producer Gary W. Goldstein. Here is the interview. Welcome, Gary, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
Ashley, good to be here with you.
So to start out, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up and how did you get interested in the entertainment business?
I grew up in San Francisco. I was born in New York, but I really grew up in San Francisco. And, I just kind of fell in love with story when I was a really young kid. Books were the thing for me early on, not films. I was like 7, 8 years old when I sort of met my first larger than life romantic hero, which was the Scarlet Pimpernel. Anyway, I have always had this full-on love affair with language and storytelling and the storytellers. And for a time, I got into the music business. I produced all the concerts at UC Berkeley as an undergrad, Joni Mitchell, all the great poet laureates of the day. But I just, it didn't feel like music was the right fit. The business of music wasn't a right fit. So I took a bit of a left turn. I became a criminal defense lawyer because to me, being a romantic, the courtroom was great theater. And if you didn't tell a really persuasive story, something bad would happen. So I worked in the ghetto of San Francisco representing the indigent adults in lieu of the public defender. And that was a great chapter of my life. But again, not really, Ashley, a perfect fit for my temperament. I didn't want to live my life going into jails and whatnot. So I ran away to LA because I just had this sort of late blooming idea that I wanted to be in the film business. A lot of my heroes were from the publishing world. They were not only the authors, but the great editors, Max Perkins, who discovered Faulkner, Hemingway, Ring Lardner, Thomas Wolfe. And I thought if I could be like micro Max, but working with writers and directors in LA in the film business, that would be sort of a really cool thing. And that's what I did. I packed up my Volkswagen, whatever fit came to LA with me. Mm-hmm. And within a year of getting here, I didn't really know anyone here. I didn't know the business at all. But I just, wherever I went, everybody was my 5-minute mentor. And I spent a year trying to puzzle together what this business was and what the job titles were. And I didn't want to be an attorney, but I knew how to represent people. And someone told me about management. So I started a lit management company in the relatively early 80s. It was, at the time, management was called personal management. It was for actors only. So no one had really heard of a lit manager back then, but I just did it. And if someone looked at me askance, I just said, oh, never mind, I'm their attorney. And because I was green and new and pretty naive, so were my clients. And I just had a lot of writers. If you said in a public space, oh, interesting, you're a writer, I represent people just like you, you had 3 new clients on the spot. And over time, over the first several years, I really just took myself to school and read thousands of scripts, like multiple scripts every single day, and set up. And as soon as I hung my shingle as a lit manager, it gave me an excuse to call anybody and say, hey, you don't know me, I don't know you, but I have these gems, these beautiful, this is a boutique, I've got these amazing clients, and we should meet for coffee, or I'll come to your office, or we'll have a meal, whatever it was. And I spent my first 3 years literally networking morning, noon, and night. And over time, I sort of upgraded my client list, and I got a sense of what a story really should be on the page, and what deal memos looked like, and how to negotiate, and who I needed to know, and what they're, So anyway, it took several years, but I figured it out.
And so let me dive into a couple things you just said there. I have a lot of, writers, they're not necessarily producers, but writers that have a career, much like your legal career, and they might be in their early 30s or even older, 40s, 50s, and they might want to take a right turn with their career and they want to break into screenwriting. So what was sort of the emotional element of that? I mean, you obviously had gone to law school. That was an investment in time and money. How did you get over that hurdle? And did you come down to LA and actually practice law? Was that sort of your day job to get into things? But just to describe some of the emotional stuff going through. I mean, you had to say something to your parents. They probably thought this was a little kooky to go to law school and then pack up and go to LA to be a producer.
Well, yeah, my parents and everybody I knew, all my friends thought I was completely stark raving mad. So I had a respectable life. I was respectable. I had a career once I quit criminal law, I did about a year of litigation, civil litigation at this really interesting little firm up in San Francisco. And one day I just announced that I was done. I was quitting. I went directly to my father's place of business. I yanked him out. He was my hero, my best friend, and sat him down over tea or coffee or lunch or whatever. And I said, Dad, and I was nervous as a cat on a hot tin roof. And I just said, Dad, I've got to talk to you. I just quit my job, but what I want to tell you is not that I quit a job, but I just quit a career. I have no desire ever again to be an attorney. And I was like braced, like waiting for the lecture, investment of time, money, et cetera. And he just smiled instantly and said, great. And I was like taken aback. And he said, yeah, listen, I just don't think you've been happy. And I think you should go out in the world and find what excites you. And whatever that is, go after it. That was my dad. So
what a great guy.
He was extraordinary. My dad was very special. So I did. And I literally, every guy on both sides of my family tree had been entrepreneurs. And they weren't Bill Gates but they did fine. They took care of their families. They had a good life. I just grew up sort of with this unconscious belief that everybody had a right to strike out on their own. And if you worked hard enough, that you would prevail in time. And so when I came to LA, I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a job. I didn't want to be an attorney. I wasn't looking for a job. Honestly, Ashley, I'm one of those guys who knew very early on that I was unemployable. I did not like team sport. I failed out of Cub Scouts. I just didn't want to climb someone's ladder. So when people would say, well, you could be an agent and you could represent people and you could climb the ladder, it was very unappealing to me. I wanted to do my own thing. So I just rolled the dice. I didn't have a lot in savings, but I would say that I was stubborn and committed, whatever it took. And truth be told, so I'll tell a tale on myself. My first venture was, this is going back a long time, before your time, I suspect, but Francis Ford Coppola, his early films, he was one of my many writer-director heroes. And he had toured the country, the US, with a film called Napoleon from the 20s. Color, beautiful film. He toured it across the great theaters of America, these grand theaters. He did it, he screened it in triptych, 3 big screens with a live symphony, and he was the darling of not only the public, but the critics. He was like lauded for this. And not long after I decided to open a business, a guy approached me with the rights to a film called The New Babylon from the 20s, the last expressionist film before Stalin cracked down. And it was a black and white film about the communards in Paris. It was like a moving painting. It was so gorgeous. And it featured a score by a then 21-year-old Shostakovich. So the music was insanely beautiful. And I thought, well, I can't, this was pre-internet. And I knocked on American Zoetrope's doors 1,000 times that no one would return my call. So I decided I'm going to option this thing. I'm going to tour it in the theaters, and Coppola's going to have to reach out to me. Long story short, I had to borrow $80,000. I didn't have money. I borrowed $80,000 to support everything required to do this thing, get the rights and radio and TV trailers and all this stuff. And I lost that $80,000 in the opening weekend. The test city was Columbus, Ohio. The firm I'd hired did nothing. They didn't sell a single ticket. I arrived really with a total misunderstanding of what was on the ground. And so I had like a shock to the system that took me to my knees. And interestingly, my reaction to it, I mean, I came home, I had a pity party for several days. And then I realized, look, it is what it is. It's going to take me years to pay back 80,000, because back in the 80s, 80,000 might have been 800,000. Mm-hmm. And but it just made me decide, look, I've got a real choice to make here. I'm either going to double down and work my butt off and make this work, or I'm going to crawl back to San Francisco and have to be a lawyer, whatever I don't want to do. And that's not a choice. I'm going to stay. I'm going to stick this thing out. So people have bad things happen to them, and often you hear people in interviews say it was the best thing that ever happened to me, and you think, best is a really powerful word, right? Mm-hmm. It was one of the best things that ever happened to me. It made me very clear about what I wanted in life.
Gotcha. I'm curious. I've heard this story from screenwriters a number of times, and I think we're going to get into some of this with your early clients, but how does a screenwriter find a young, hungry producer like you were, 35 years ago? How does a screenwriter identify the guys? Exactly what you said. You weren't going to quit. You were going to stick it out. How does a screenwriter align themselves with a producer that has, the wherewithal to stick it out for this number of decades?
Some of it's dumb luck, but a lot of it's not. It's elbow grease. And the one thing that I wish more screenwriters and other creatives had was the gumption to see their own value and know that they had a rightful seat at the table, and they shouldn't be shy about announcing themselves as the artist, as the creator, to the world, and not necessarily wait, hoping, someday if only I have an agent, right? Mm-hmm. And or sending out blank query letters where you're really hiding behind an impersonal letter, which is also hiding behind a script cover. Like this business turns on personal relationships, like so many. It's your personality and your creative DNA and all that good stuff. It's like the actor who goes into an audition doesn't get the job and is all upset because he misses the bigger picture. Like, your job is to go into the room, charm and share your energy and your personality with the casting associate, the casting director, the producer, whoever's in the room. Your goal should be to be invited back. And if you get the gig, that's frosting on the cake. Mm-hmm. If more screenwriters understood that it's really important, and how much you can accelerate your career if you get to know, and I'm not talking about the name on the door. That's intimidating. You're not going to call up Steven Spielberg or whatever, even lesser names, but you can get on. Everyone has a phone that gets answered, and it may be an assistant, it might be a creative executive, whoever it is. Those people are trusted. If you win them over, you have access to that company. And that's what they don't really realize, is they're terrified of calling strangers on their own behalf. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of what I talk about in my masterclass and other, coaching and the stuff that I've done on the side. But it's, without the writers, without their stories, and everyone's always in pursuit of the next great voice, the next undiscovered great project. And their job and their own currency and value and growth potential hinges on knowing talent in their projects.
Yeah. So let's dig into some of these projects and some of your first credits. Cannibal Women in the Avocado Jungle. J.F. Lawton was writer-director of that project. Maybe you can talk about that. It sounds like you had your management firm going along. I assume at some point you folded him as a client on that. But talk about that. How did you meet him, and what was it about his writing that you liked? And then ultimately, how did you get this first project off the ground?
I met Jonathan in an unusual way. Ashley, in the mid-'80s, I bought one of the early Mac computers. It came in a refrigerator-sized box, and you couldn't use it until someone programmed it. So I knew a gal, a screenwriter, who was writing scripts on it. And I asked her, who programmed it? And she said, call this guy Jonathan, J.F. Lawton. And I called him, and he spent 3 weeks. He was very quiet, brilliant kid. And he was 23 at the time. And he came in and he spent 3 weeks learning everything that I do and programming brilliantly for me. And toward the end of the 3 weeks, we were having a conversation, and I was asking, I'm curious, so I'm asking questions. And he let drop some pearl in the conversation, and I asked him, are you a writer? He said, well, yes, but he was very shy and about that fact. And he said, I dropped out of film school. I've written 7 scripts. No one's ever read one of them. They're just sitting in a stack in my one-room apartment. And I said, well, I really like you, and let me read a script that you've read, and if I like it, I'll introduce you to an agent or something. And long story short, I read not 1 but 3, and each one got a little bit better. He was giving them to me in the order in which he'd written them. They kept getting better. And I said, these are really good. You know what? I think the idea of an agent is maybe not the right idea. I think the right idea is that I work with you, but I do have a condition. These are very quirky, sort of college-y script stories. If you could write me a mature two-hander, strong male-female lead, and I want it to be a romance. I don't have a lot of conditions, but I want it to be a romance, and not requiring necessarily an enormous budget. That's it. And the reason I say that is because he had just ended he didn't end it. He had a 5-year relationship that had just ended, and he was, he was hurting. And he's a very sensitive guy, and most of his scripts featured these really complex, amazing women lead characters. And I thought, who's going to write a better romance than a guy who's heartbroken? So he wrote me that script, came back a couple of months later with a first draft that was one of the best I've ever read as a first draft, and it was called 3000. And it was like absolutely gobsmackingly good, and I knew this is how I'm going to introduce him to the community. This script is going to open doors, and it did. I got it accepted to the Sundance Production Lab. It started to create some buzz, et cetera. And we can talk about that more later. But that was how I met him. And I agreed to represent him. And we were having great success for an early career. When the writers went on strike in 1988, we knew it was going to be a long strike. And I said to him, look, why don't we pull out one of your college scripts? And why don't we go out and make a film and take advantage of this? Because otherwise we're going to be able to, we're going to be bored. So he had told me he wanted to direct. I thought, well, I'll produce, I'll raise a little bit of capital. And I got a couple of $100,000, and he said, that's enough. But neither of us knew what we were doing. Yeah. It's like the blind leading the blind. So we said, okay, so we have 4 weeks from the date I had money in my hand. We had 4 weeks till we were supposed to be in Utah for the Sundance Production Lab for 3000, the script that would become Pretty Woman. And I said, great, we'll make it when we get back. And he said, no, let's do it before. I don't want it lingering over my head. Why don't we make it before we go? And I said, sure, why not? We got 4 weeks. And we did. We made this, it was a sort of feminist spoof comedy, Cannibal women, et cetera. And we literally handed it in the night before we got on a plane, and off we went to Sundance. So that was how we did the first one. We did another little film together after that. Same thing, sort of bootstrap. But Sundance is what really sort of opened a lot of doors for me as a company and for Jonathan as a career. From there, things just ratcheted up, and the phone started ringing for the first time.
And what do you think, just as sort of a aside, but what do you think of novice writers or beginning writers saying, hey, I want to direct too, and attaching themselves as a director to a project? Just in general, what do you think about that? Because I do get a lot of that, whether it's an actor or a director, they want to attach themselves to these projects. Yeah,
listen, I applaud hyphenates. I love that ambition. I love working with writer-directors. And yet, I would say, if your intention is to do a low-budget film that you're going to finance, that you're going to go out in front of friends and family or otherwise, if you can raise the money and go out and make a film on your own, absolutely. If you're going out to the marketplace, if you're shopping a script to the indies and the majors, et cetera, streamers today, what have you, Then I think, you might be doing yourself a favor if you didn't attach yourself as a director to the very first or second necessarily, but start to get some momentum, get some recognition, create some relationships where people know, like, and trust you, have some working experience with you, and then you can sort of leapfrog into wearing both hats.
Gotcha. I'm curious. It sounds like meeting JF Lawton was a little bit kind of just a quirky situation where he's working on your computer. Maybe you can talk through how you got some of your other clients. What is sort of a more general way? And this, I'm asking this sort of in a modern context. What should writers be doing to get in front of managers and agents?
Well, there's a couple of things they do. There's the what I did was a little bit probably not the traditional path. But I, at the time, joined an outdoor health club that I love tennis, I love paddle tennis, and I love swimming. So they had paddle tennis courts, and swimming pool. So I would go, and I figured everybody that's out there in the middle of the week is a freelancer, and they're probably in the entertainment business somehow, some way. And sure enough, most of them were. And over the course of 12 months, I exaggerate not, it was probably more than 150, but I made a lot of. I did the same thing, very vulnerable, very palms up, very honest. Like, I'm new, I'm the turnip that just fell off the truck. If you could spare 5 minutes, I have a couple of questions that would mean the world to me. And people approach that way can be very generous, almost all. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up befriending and through recidivist interaction, just befriended a lot of these folks who then became, enduring relationships. I would say, so there's the social, if you belong to a gym, talk to people, find out who they are. What do they do in an environment where it's not like they're at their office busy and the phone's ringing off the hook and here's a new person they don't know calling. That would be one thing. But the other is, what I said before, get to know the assistants and get to know other writers and ask the assistants, how does your company operate? Make them your mentor. Don't just say, will you read my script or can I submit a script? Because that's what everybody's doing. Make it a human affair and call every writer and say, what's your experience? And do you have a great manager? What have you learned about working with a manager, finding an agent? And then calling assistants to agents, same thing. If the assistant, I have had assistants, a bunch of assistants over time. What's really interesting and consistent about them is they're very well vetted, and that's true across the town because everybody wants in the business. That's how they learn from the inside out. And if you understand that assistants are these ambitious, really smart people who have a life expectancy of probably 24 months max, and they're given a job, right? They're moving on. And not always in a linear way. It's unpredictable. But if you realize how valuable they are and what a conduit they can be, make friends with the assistants. Ask every writer call the assistant to their agent or their manager. And just make it a really humane experience and befriend them and be palms up, be completely transparent. And so I'm not going to, I know everybody wants you to read their script. I'm not going to do that. I have another agenda. I'm totally straight up with people.
And I'm curious because I'm someone that, would dread doing cold calls. I've tried them in the past. I never felt like I had a good, I'm not quick on my feet in terms of my ability to chat with people. Do you have any advice there just for writers that I think a lot of writers fall into this camp where we're more introverted and kind of want to be by ourselves? What are some tips for someone that is like that? How do they get the courage to just make these cold calls? The gift of gab, being chatty, being able to just chat people up.
Yeah. The easiest and probably most generous and most effective tip I could give you is to say, be other focused. Like when you call someone, don't make it about you. I mean, you want to introduce yourself, you give them your name and you say, I'm a writer, I'm relatively new and I'm not going to submit a script. But I'm calling because I want to know you and you obviously have beat out 50 or 100 people to get this job, for God's sakes. And it's fascinating. So I don't want to submit a script. I have a couple of questions. If you have 3 to 5 minutes, it'd be awesome if you could help. I will ask them questions like, where are you from? Where'd you go to school? And by the way, you're sitting on an agent's desk. Does that mean you want to be an agent? Or do you want to go into production? Do you want to go into casting or whatever? Start to make it about them and literally I would do this. After 3 minutes, I would say, I've used up my time. Thank you. I've got another question, but I'll call you in a week. At the same time, 1 o'clock when your boss is probably at lunch, I'll call you back if you've got a few minutes. That would be awesome. In other words, you build in your follow-up so you're not sitting there nervously thinking, how do I follow up?
Mm-hmm.
I get their last name so I can research today the heck out of them on Google, and I can find out a lot about that human being. So when I call them back the second time, I'm saying, you may not remember, we spoke a week ago. But oh my God, I just researched. I didn't realize you went to this school. You studied this. Blah blah blah. Whatever it is, again, make it about them. Find some commonality, anything. And again, you just want to be on the phone for 3-4 minutes. It's not a big deal. By the third, let me back up, Ashley. My whole thesis is the first time you call someone, you're a stranger. The second time, they may remember you, and if they do, you're familiar, but they don't really know you. But some tripwire happens the third time you talk to someone. After you've talked to someone 3 times, there's a trick that happens in our brain, and it's like, oh, it's Ashley. And if you're always pleasant and you're not asking big favors, when they hang up the phone, you want there to be no work for them to do. You want to be the one who's not asking work of them. By the third time, then you can say, hey, I still feel a little bit shy about sending you my work, my script. But here's the thing. I have a pitch deck, or I have a treatment, or I have something really, really small. It would mean the world to me. Do you have if I sent it to you, would you have 5 minutes to look at it and give me your thoughts? And that's how I just sort of, it's like a courtship. You think of it as courtship, right? And you honor the other person for look, 99% of people who call anybody, any office, they're in a rush to brush right past the assistant, get the boss on the phone or whatever. These people are overworked, and they're not the recipient of a lot of respect or empathy. I had one guy years ago. I called up a guy on behalf of a chef. I have a friend in LA who's a very renowned chef, and he had created this proposal for a book. It's not a typical cookbook. It was very innovative. And he said, can you help me get it published? I said, I know people in publishing, but not in this area. I'm an idiot. I don't know what to do. He said, well, just, could you help? And I said, okay, fine. So I called a bunch of people, and I said, who in the publishing world could be in this vertical? And there was one name that came across from 5 different conversations. They also mentioned this guy amongst others. So I called this guy. His name was Simon. And he's in New York on Madison Avenue at a respected company. And I called this guy Simon, and I leave a message. And he calls me back, and he says, yeah, this is Simon. And I said, hi, it's Gary Goldstein. That's very kind of you to call me back. Listen, I'm calling on not on my behalf, but on behalf of a friend of mine who's a very respected, celebrated chef, and he's got a book idea. And I don't know anything about your business. I'm not in that business. And he said, wait a minute, you're Gary Goldstein. I said, yes. He said, you're in LA. I said, yes. He said, you're a film producer. I said, yes. He said, you don't remember me. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. What's Simon? Oh, Simon Green. Oh my. He said, do you remember Ian Greenstein? I shouldn't say these names on the podcast. Anyway, he said, do you remember Ian? And I said, oh my God, it was like a light went off. And I went, Ian, I loved him. You're that Simon? You were his assistant? That was so many years ago. He said, yeah, but I've never forgotten you. And I'll tell you why. You're the only person in Hollywood who called me and actually cared about me and asked questions about me and my aspirations and how I was feeling. You always took a couple of minutes before you asked for my boss. Whatever you're going to ask me, the answer is yes. Now tell me what you need. And I will tell you that is, to me, that is the simple, God's honest DNA truth of the dividends that you get from treating the entry-level people well. And when I say entry, those could be assistants, directors of development, creative exec, whatever they call it, all those titles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, just quickly. So what do you take as like a rejection rate, or people just hanging up on you? Like, what can people expect if they take this? And you're obviously very personable and experienced at doing this. How many times are the scissors going to say no thanks and just hang up on you?
You know what? That's going to happen. You're going to find people who are in a bad mood. They're having a bad day. Their phones are ringing off the hook and the boss is yelling at them. There's the million reasons why it could be an inopportune moment. But if you do it 10 times and you get through to 4 people, that's a huge win. And if only one of those 4 becomes a recidivist conversation. That's a huge win. So imagine if you made 2 outgoing calls a day. That's it. And you research, who are your targets? Who do you want to know? What companies and whatever, across all the verticals, not just production companies and agents, but everybody. I called cinematographers. I called casting directors. I called people that I had no need of in the moment, but I thought, they know so many people. I'm going to play human billiards. Mm-hmm. Here's my experience, Ashley, with a lot of people who, as you say, aren't necessarily, their gift of gab is not their strong suit. They are a little bit isolated. They're a little bit introverted, perhaps, what have you. But they're smart. I know that. And the ones who actually dare to be courageous or bold enough to actually start calling these folks, it's going to be horrifyingly awkward the first few times. The second few times, the calls 1 through 5 are going to be a hot mess, and calls 6 through 10 are going to be a mildly less hot mess, maybe a warm mess, right? But the thing is, within a couple of weeks, you're going to start to go, not only is it easier than I thought, but wow, I'm surprised at the number of people who actually are welcoming, in the sense of they're available and they say hello, and they there's a civil energy and a receptive energy, and it's like, who are you? How can I help you? Once you start doing that, if you're willing to be uncomfortable, which I think is one of the key indicators of success in the world, if you're willing to be uncomfortable for a little bit, and by the way, every screenwriter is uncomfortable writing a script. It's horrible. It's a terrible experience, right? Sometimes. If you're willing to be a little bit uncomfortable with other people in the business for a little bit, you're going to find that within a few weeks max, you grow a little bit of muscle. It's just like going to the gym. Same thing. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to be great at it. Sometimes what I tell people is, if you are shy, if you are introverted and awkward, and if this is terrifying to you, then here's what you're going to do. You're going to get on the phone, you're going to call the assistant, you're going to call that number, and the assistant's going to pick up the phone. And you're going to say, look, my name's Goldstein, Ashley, and I got to tell you right out of the gate, I'm a writer, I'm new, and there's a reason why I'm calling you, but I have to first say I am absolutely nervous as crap about calling you. I just feel so awkward. So forgive me if I stutter a little bit. Guess what? You just took it off the table. Mm-hmm. And I've done that plenty of times early on, and I don't really do it now because I actually enjoy it. But it's sport. But it wasn't always, because I came to a town where I didn't know a soul. I didn't know the bit, and I had this need. It was like this anxiety about, how do I find my way in? And I'm a charlatan. I don't know anything, right? So I was like everybody else at the beginning. Well, I would tell them that. It's like, I'm brand new. I don't know what I'm doing. And this is like, I'm out of my depth, but I need, it would be such a huge help if you would spend a couple of minutes on the phone with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I'm curious if you're, so you're just, again, throwing out numbers. So you sort of suggested, well, if you made 2 phone calls per day, how pragmatic were you with your cold calling? Did you religiously do 2 calls per day? Did you create a spreadsheet? Was it more intuitive, where you just tried to legitimately get to know them and remember people? But was there a spreadsheet and sort of some pragmatism?
Very simple. I'm not a good spreadsheet guy, so it was a very simple spreadsheet. And I would put, Ashley Scott Meyers, and I'd put your title, assistant to producer or whatever, or in the name of the company and the phone number. I would put the date that we first spoke. So then I knew a week from then I was going to call you back, because I always said that I'm going to call you a week from today. It was just, so I could be like a minor bird. I didn't even have to think. I'll call you a week from today. I'd look at the calendar and put it down. Because then I could also later track, and on the 3rd call I sent him a treatment, or on the 4th call I sent the screenplay. And I kept a history, and it just gradually grew and grew and grew. But the list, who went on the spreadsheet? So that was my homework. That was my research. Like, it wasn't just seat of the pants. It was like, I'd wake up one day and go, who am I going to call today? No, it was like, what are the films that I've seen in the last 6 months where I went, oh my God? And then I would look it up, because we have all those websites, right? And I would say, who, not just the producers, but the writer, the editor, the cinematographer, the casting director. I just go right on down the line. Anyone that I could find that was associated with that film, and I'd ask them about the experience, and like, oh my God, that film is one of the reasons I'm in this business, right? And I would start a conversation, and I would let them know where I was, my trajectory, but that I was a babe in the woods. And I had a couple of questions. I always made it about asking questions about it, because the subtext of that is I'm giving you a promotion. I'm honoring you for your wisdom and I'm making you my mentor, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes I'd actually use the word mentor. But I was very intentional in the sense of I would sit at night, quiet in the quiet of the night, and say, what other places, what films, and I'd use films as the lens through which I would decide who my targets were. And it could be TV
Gotcha,
series as
gotcha.
well, by the way. I don't want to be a film snob. It was both. So what piece of content was so awesome that I want to know anybody associated with it that I can reach out to? And they weren't always just the people who could read produce or my script or represent me. Because I think 99.9% of writers think about who can represent me and who could produce me. And they forget about everybody else. But those other people aren't being called upon this
Hmm.
to the same extent at all. So they're available and they love getting called. Successful people love to talk about what they do.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. I'm curious, even after decades of being in the business, do you still do some cold calls and some outreach as part of your sort of daily routine?
Absolutely.
You still do
Yeah.
it, huh?
Yeah. I
Good,
do it. I
good.
do it across the board. I actually have some other ventures, outside of film, and I do it across the board. Like I'm always calling people I don't know. I have gotten to the point where I realize that's where the gold is.
Hmm.
So I'm very selective, and I do my research, and I say, hey, look, it might have to do with buying a piece of property. It might have to do with some entrepreneurial venture, or I've been part of startups, and it doesn't matter what it is. I just want to know people who
Hmm.
are smarter than me in that area who can really hopefully be generous and I can hopefully reciprocate, but we can have a little fun with it along the way.
Hmm.
So yeah, to me, it's like calling people, and you get to the place where once you do it enough, it's less arduous because if you have suddenly imagine if you make that many calls, 2 calls a day, which is not a lot. You make a couple of calls a day, it takes 15 minutes and you're done. You got the whole rest of the day. You make 2 calls a day and you fail 90% of the time. You're terrible. You
Hmm.
just won big time because out of the 10 calls you made this week, if you did that and you've got 4 new people that you have, I won't call it friendship or even relationship, I'll say rapport. If you have rapport with 4 new people a month, how many writers would cut off this arm to think in a year I could have a few dozen people inside the business who can open doors, who can talk to me, who can help in that short a time frame? Like it's mind-boggling, right?
Hmm.
So and here's what happens, and it's happened to me enough. I know it happens. Is these people matriculate, and when they do, the same thing always happens. I find out, oh, whoa, that's great. You're moving on. You got this amazing gig.
Hmm.
Congratulations, that's so cool. Well, I go with them. But what also happens is, I always say, and they often offer, but I always ask, by the way, before you go, you're going to train your replacement. Would you? I'd really appreciate if you'd introduce me to your replacement. Bam, my Rolodex doubles, and I just
Hmm.
keep doing that. And sometimes I'll just call someone that I've developed a rapport with and say, hey, I keep, I like reaching out to new people. I love meeting people in this business and hearing their story. Who have you met recently? Who's like young? And this is a question I've asked 1,000 times. Who have you come across lately? I don't care if they're an agent, a manager, an attorney, a producer, doesn't matter. Who's impressed you? Who's smart and really positive outlook, and who's really like putting in the elbow grease and that you enjoy? Who would that be? Would you introduce me? And And
Huh.
I do the same in turn. Like I will say to them, oh, so I've learned about you that you want to go into orange, not blue. Okay. You want to be in production, not in casting, or whatever it is. I just met this guy in development over here who is really cool, really smart. Would you like me to introduce you? I mean, I was really impressed with him. I'm happy to introduce you. And I would start like making it.
Hmm.
It's an easy way to ingratiate yourself and actually do something good that you feel good about, that they appreciate. and that just cements that relationship further. And now your karma points go up.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, taking another things, and that's all great advice. I really hope people are listening to that because I think that's a really succinct, all about cold calling. Some fantastic advice for writers. So another thing that I encounter quite often is writers come to me and they're starting to do some producing. For instance, raising money or trying to get some talent attached. How much of that does that affect as a producer? If someone comes to you with some money attached and things, how much of a benefit would that be in terms of you as a producer, an experienced producer, looking at that project if it has some recognizable name talent or some substantial money attached to it?
Oh, it makes a huge difference. I mean, obviously, with the understanding that first things first, you've got to read and really love the project, because when you commit to being a producer on a project, we know you're going to invest a lot of elbow grease and a lot of time before it becomes a reality, and so you've got to just really love both the project and the writer. Or writer director or writer producer, I'm sorry, in the case of your example, you've got to really enjoy your chemistry and you've got to love the project. But if those things are true, and you've got two of those like situations, and one has a significant name talent, the kind of name that will help motor or be the engine, and some money attached either. That's a huge incentive for two reasons. One, money is helpful, big talent is helpful, but it also tells you a lot about who you're partnering with. They're doers, they're not talkers. They're gonna get shit done.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. What are some things, and this is again sort of more of a general question, but what are some things you see in screenplays as you read them that you think maybe writers could do more of? Just some basic writing tips, maybe some, again, sort of your perspective as a producer. What are some things you see in scripts that really thinks, wow, this is something I think writers should do more often and is a great thing for writers?
Gosh, that's a tough question. I would say right off the top, surprise me right out of the gate. Give me an opening that just I wasn't expecting. I don't know if there's one tip that I would say across the board. But I think hook me into your story. Give me dialogue that makes me sort of sit up straight, pay attention. It's the opposite of the old adage, or my old adage, I guess. I never, ever, ever want to see and hear the same thing. I don't want, Humphrey Bogart's not going to lean over to Lauren Bacall and light her cigarette and say, let me light your cigarette. It's just like, don't do that, right? So, be really I guess what I would say, if I could reverse engineer it, I would say, whatever you write, say it aloud, do a table read, do something, figure out, does this feel like real life, unexpected, a character we haven't met yet? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, perfect. What's next for you? What kind of projects are you working on?
I've got a number of projects that I'm developing interestingly one of them is based on a novel. And it's something I've never. It's funny. I keep finding myself attracted to things that I would never have expected. So one of them is a novel that is what I would call fantasy adventure, historical fantasy adventure set in Ireland. And it was just so alluring. There's almost one track that's a little bit mystical realism, and the other that really explores the culture and the characters of the time. And I just thought, oh my God, this is so not me. I've never been to Ireland, but I love this. I love what it's saying about the Irish and about us as humans. I think I want to do this project. So I'm developing that with the writers. That's in the scripting stage. The other another one is based on the life rights, true life story of the woman who invented the first ever home pregnancy test back in the 60s, when women in the workplace were, and she wasn't a woman of science or medicine. She was a designer, product designer. Oh, wow. And she was kind of a lefty artist who did a lot of political art. And she just saw this and the things that were, of course, it was a different time. So much was illegal. Like you couldn't get a prescription for birth control unless you had a doctor's prescription and you were married. Wasn't available. I mean, forget abortion, forget, like it was a very different time. And she was, she was viewed as beyond scandalous, like literally single-handedly ripping apart, shredding the moral fabric of America. And so they took advantage and they stole the patent and they buried it and they this and that. But eventually, of course, today it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's all her fault. Disintermediating the white coat where you were, 3 weeks to get your results and you had no determination over and some women didn't qualify to even get the test. So anyway, she said, this is not right. It's an amazing story on a societal level, not just about women's rights and over their body. And I just thought there's so much meat on this bone. It's not an easy. It wasn't easy to architect the story as a 3-act plotted feature, but we cracked it, and it's got a lot of social meat on the bone, and it's exciting as hell to me. So I've got a number of, I've got a couple of others that are in different stages. One that's totally nascent. And then a couple of projects I'm just talking about with people. There's always that period of let's talk about this a lot and see if it stays with me and I really get more excited, not less excited.
Is there anything you've seen recently that you thought maybe screenwriters could learn something from? Anything on Netflix, HBO, Hulu? What are some things you've seen recently that you would recommend?
Well, yeah, I mean, I, like everybody, because of COVID, got in the habit of watching a lot more than I'm used to. And that includes series. God, honestly, Ashley, if I had a crystal ball and you showed me in the 80s what was going to happen on the small screen, and because back then there was this big wall of snobbery that separated film and TV, that's gone. But if you had suggested to me there's going to be this new golden age of television, I would have definitely wanted to be a TV writer, a showrunner, because you have now all this runway to flesh out your characters and your stories. 5 years, my God, it's great.
Yeah.
I'm not really good at remembering titles, to be honest. I don't know. I love that there's this big opening. See, back in the 80s, there were 30 great independent companies, the Vestrons, the Hemdales, et cetera, and they were putting out everything from Dirty Dancing to Platoon in El Salvador, and like more films than the studios combined. It was great. To me, the streamers have to feed a very broad appetite, from limited docuseries to series TV to alternative content to features. And yes, there's some big features out there, but it's amazing the percentage of stuff that's coming online through the various streamers, not just Netflix. There's 23 great streamers right now. And how many of those are really considered low to moderate budget films? And I think that's sort of like such a breath of fresh air. It's like, where did our independent cinema go? Well, it's kind of back. Got to be a self-starter. It's not like you can walk in the door and someone's going to fund development. Those days are gone. But there are places where you can find distribution, and all you have to do is tell a great story and find decent performers, and have gumption, dare to be, a self-starter. So I watch a lot of interesting little stuff. I just watched Jonathan Furman was one of the producers, a lot of producers, but one of the producers on Greenland. I thought that was fabulous. Just like I'm in the good everyman audience. Like, I'm rooting for every film. I tend to enjoy. They have to be really missing a lot for me not to enjoy it. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of genres that I like. So there's never the glass is more than half full all the time.
What's the best way for people to keep up with what you're doing? Twitter, Facebook, a blog, anything you're comfortable sharing, I will round up for the show notes.
All my handles are the same. It's at Gary W. Goldstein. That's Twitter, Instagram, and Clubhouse, and it's pretty much everything. And then there's a website. I do have a masterclass. I do some coaching. So people, if they're interested, they can go take a look at. It's creativeedge.com. Very simple.
Gotcha.
So those are the two things: my social handles, the website. Ashley, that's it, and I really appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah.
Hey, yeah, thank you. Well, Gary, I really appreciate you coming on the show and talking with me today. This was a fascinating interview, and you're always welcome back if you want to talk about something else.
I'd love it. I love what you do, and so right back at you. I'd love to have a continuing conversation over time.
Perfect. Sounds good, Gary. I really appreciate it.
Fantastic. Happy 4th of July.
Yep. Happy 4th of July to you too. We'll talk to you later.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. A quick plug for the SYS Screenwriting Analysis Service. It's a really economical way to get a high-quality professional evaluation on your screenplay. When you buy our 3-pack, you get evaluations at just $67 per script for feature films and just $55 for teleplays. All the readers have professional experience reading for studios, production companies, contests, and agencies. You can read a short bio on each reader on our website, and you can pick the reader who you think is the best fit for your script. Turnaround time is usually just a few days, but rarely more than a week. The readers will evaluate your script on 6 key factors: concept, character, structure, marketability, tone, and overall craft, which includes formatting, spelling, and grammar. Every script will get a grade of pass, consider, or recommend, which should help you roughly understand where your script might rank if you were to submit it to a production company or agency. We can provide an analysis on features or television scripts. We also do proofreading without any analysis. We will also look at a treatment or outline and give you the same analysis on it. So if you're looking to vet some of your project ideas, this is a great way to do it. We will also write your logline and synopsis for you. You can add this logline and synopsis writing service to an analysis, or you can simply purchase this service as a standalone product. As a bonus, if your screenplay gets a recommend or a consider from one of our readers, you get to list the screenplay in the SYS Select database, which is a database for producers to find screenplays and a big part of our SYS Select program. Producers are in the database searching for material on a daily basis, so it's another great way to get your material in front of them. As a further bonus, if your script gets a recommend from one of our readers, your screenplay will get included in our monthly Best Of newsletter. Each month we send out a newsletter that highlights the best screenplays that have come through our script analysis service. This is a monthly newsletter that goes out to our list of over 400 producers who are actively looking for material. So again, this is another great way to get your material out there. So if you want a professional evaluation of your screenplay at a very reasonable price, check out www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. On the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing Bria Grant, who just wrote and starred in a feature thriller called Lucky. She's been acting for years, has a ton of great acting credits, but next week we talk about her writing and how she's been able to use her acting experience to help get this project produced. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. That's our show. Thank you for listening.